Hey guys, hope you're doing well. This is going to be the fifth update regarding the coronavirus and how we're being affected here in China. Let's go through the numbers first of all, and then we're going to be spending a lot of time actually today talking about these numbers. But yeah, let's first look at the numbers. You know, it's amazing how fast this thing is changing, because when I first started working on kind of the notes for this video, the numbers were 14,489 confirmed cases. I just checked again, it's now 17,205 cases, so that's jumped up by about 3,000. Previously 304 deaths, now 361 deaths. So these numbers are changing constantly. It could be by the time you watch this, the numbers will have increased again. What's interesting about these numbers, though, is when you compare them to the numbers that you might be seeing in Western media, they're probably a lot larger. And the reason for that is that, you know, the main news outlets, whether it's BBC or CNN or, you know, whatever news you're watching, they're all looking at the official numbers coming out of Beijing, coming out of the China's People Daily English, news, and that's even late. What comes out first is the Chinese news, then it goes to English, and then from the English it goes to the West. So the numbers, it seems, in Western media are all like a day behind, or even sometimes more than that. Now, first of all, how we're being affected here. It's not terrible. I haven't gone out a whole lot in the last couple of days because I got groceries. I got so many groceries that in that last video that you saw. The biggest way we're being affected here is travel restrictions, and especially airplane travel. So we have friends that are stranded in other countries that can't come back to China because their flights have been canceled. We have friends that are here that were planning on leaving that are also stranded. Moa is not stranded, but her flight was canceled back to China, so she's had to get another flight, which was a little more expensive. So we're working with the airlines to see if we can get the first flight reimbursed. So that's kind of the way we're being affected. I have to leave the country in another couple of weeks, also to renew my visa, and my flight was just changed, and I'm hoping it won't be canceled, or the flight coming back won't be canceled. So we'll see how that'll go. It's still so far off. Things are changing so much, so I'm not worrying about it too much. So that's how we're being affected. Other than that, we're doing okay. None of our friends have gotten sick. So that's how I'm being affected. Now, likely, no matter what country you're living in now, you're seeing news of the coronavirus and how that's affecting travel. Now, a lot of airlines are canceling their routes to China. The first airlines, I believe, to do this was British Airways. There are 3 American airlines that have canceled all their flights: American Airlines, Delta, and United. And the U.S. has started to pose some travel restriction on visitors coming from China. So the way it stands now, and again, this could change, so don't base your travel arrangements on what I'm saying, but the way it stands now, if you travel to China within the last 2 weeks and you're a foreign national, so you're non-U.S. national, it doesn't matter if you're Japanese, Korean, Canadian, Chinese, you will not be allowed entry into America. However, if you're an American national, you'll be able to come in. Now, depending on where you traveled in China, if you travel to Hubei province, which is where Wuhan is located, then you'll be subjected to a mandatory 2-week quarantine. And if you didn't travel there, there will be likely some other kind of quarantine. There's a self-imposed quarantine that they're announcing now. Now, that could change. It could become more rigorous as time goes on. We'll just have to wait and see. But that's how it stands now, and that's affecting some of our friends as well. Now, kind of in accord with this idea of shutting off, transit lines, which of course all makes sense. We're seeing some things here in, I wouldn't call it the local media, but kind of what's being posted on social media that shows that there are some areas here that are closing things off, but kind of in a more panicked way. There have been a lot of pictures going around of various towns and villages that are closing off their roads to any outside travelers. And in fact, even in our city here, there have been a couple of neighborhoods that have done something similar. Now, these are things that are not mandated by the local governments, but things that people are just doing of their own accord. For example, blocking off the roads with cars, with boulders, with trees, with gravel, with dirt, with bulldozers and earth movers, that kind of thing, just to keep out any foreigners. And in fact, some areas are even going a step further and having like their own militias, people that are armed with weapons, just to guard the gates. It's pretty crazy when you look at it. It's like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Now, hopefully that won't continue. What we're seeing locally here in this city is that people are slowly returning to life, it seems like, but more out of a sense that they're becoming really cooped up at home, and they're kind of getting restless, staying inside for so long, and they want to get back out. They want to get to work. A lot of companies have instituted work at home measures so they can work online. And even a lot of schools now are giving out extra homework for the students, or they're mandating online classes where the teacher teaches on a video screen and the kids have to watch at home. So a lot of things are being done like this to keep people from going out, which these are all good things. These are all positive steps that are being taken. Now, next, let's talk a little bit about these numbers. Now, in the last video, the last update that I released, I started off with a clip from a scientist in Hong Kong that had just released a study that was saying basically that the numbers coming out of Wuhan for the infected were far too low. Now, why did he say that? Was it just a guess? Well, I was able to get a hold of the report. It's online. I'll post a link in the description. I read through it, and it's really interesting the way they did this study. We're going to take a look at it now and kind of figure out why they said the numbers should be so much higher than they actually are. Alright, so here we have the official article here. This is a scientific paper that was released a few days ago, so this is not completely up to date, but it explains what the findings of this paper are. And basically, in a nutshell, it's explained here. And what they found here, you can see in the first sentence, is that according to their findings, there should be 75,815 individuals infected in Wuhan as of January 25th. Now, January 25th is about a week ago, so we would expect that number to be a lot higher if they were to re-release a more updated study. Now, how do they come up with that number? Well, they explain a lot in this article about some of the things that they took into account. They did, for example, take into account that there would be some restrictions placed, some social mitigation, which what they call for quarantining or shutting down local gatherings and transportation and that sort of thing. So they're accounting for those numbers. But what's really interesting is this graph here on this page. So when you take a look at this graph, it's a little confusing. Here on the left side, you have the figures that correlate to this red line. Now, these are the number of infected that were officially reported coming out of Wuhan. On the right side, you have the numbers that are infected of other areas. So the blue line is mainland China, the numbers of infected reported in mainland China, and the green line is those being infected and reported outside of mainland China. That would be other countries, including the US or the Philippines or anywhere else. Now, what's interesting about these numbers is, of course, they're scaled. These are not the same numbers. We're not saying that outside of mainland China you have 6,500. No, these are correlated to the right side of the graph. So this scale applies to the blue and green line. This scale applies to the red line. And what you see is that the green and the blue lines, they follow approximately the same trajectory. They're expanding at approximately the same rate, which means that these numbers, they support each other. They correlate. But the red line doesn't. You see that the red line, it sort of kind of grows at this very regular rate. It jumps up a little here and then it kind of slows down again. Now, the numbers stop at about, it looks like January 27th. So we aren't able to tell what they are now. I thought about regraphing it, but it was a lot of work to try to get the different figures from different areas. So I didn't regraph it, but we would see about the same number of growth. Right now we're saying it's 17,000 infected. We're about here. So this is growing, definitely growing, but not nearly as high as the rate of growth on these other lines. Now, to take a more detailed look at what's happening here with these reported numbers, because this graph, some of the numbers have been evened out a little bit. If you take a look at this graph here, now this graph here shows a little bit more specifically, in a little bit more detail, what was coming out of Wuhan, the numbers. Now you see on the 11th of January we have 41 reported cases, 41, 41, 41. This goes all the way up until the 17th when it jumps by 4 to 45, then 62, and then we have a huge jump here to 198. That was on the 19th of January, shortly before the city was quarantined, shortly before this started becoming international news. Now, what's strange about this is that on the next day, on the 20th of January, this number doesn't change. It's still 198. And then it jumps again the next day to 270, 375, 344. So again, this red, this pink, is the same as what we're seeing here, this red line. They're graphing the same things. Now, what would account for no increase when you had such a sharp increase on the 19th and then on the 20th there's no increase? Well, we saw some things that I shared here in a previous update video. One is that it could be they're running out of kits. They're unable to test people, so the number isn't going up. It could be that they just failed to report that day. There's also a lot of news coming out about people being turned away from hospitals. The hospitals are so crowded, they can't take in new patients, which is one of the reasons they're building 2 new hospitals, one of which I believe just opened today. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but again, what it shows is that those numbers probably aren't very accurate. So again, when you compare the 2 graphs, the one of the other parts of China and other parts of the world with what's coming out of Wuhan, you see a lot less. Now, whether or not those numbers are accurate or not, who knows? We may never know, but it definitely shows that there's a pretty big discrepancy between the actual cases and what's being reported. And that's one of the reasons that I personally am so concerned with this. Now, what's also very concerning about this particular report is what's said here in the opening of the article under findings. It says here that if the transmissibility of 2019 NCOV were similar everywhere domestically and over time, we inferred that epidemics are already growing exponentially in multiple major cities of China with a lag time behind the Wuhan outbreak of about 1 to 2 weeks. So the problem with this disease, as we said before, is it's sort of a perfect storm. It's the perfect disease. First of all, it's highly infectious. It's transmissible through different means. Also, you can be contagious while you're asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. You're not coughing, you don't have a fever, and yet you're spreading it around. There's been many documented cases of this. And of course, there's no vaccine or cure. So this thing could be spreading in areas where people don't know they have it. They think they have a cold, and they're not showing severe symptoms, but they're giving it to others who will later develop into severe cases. So that's why this is so scary. It takes such a long time for symptoms to show, and then it takes more time for the tests to be done, and it takes even more time for the public to be informed that there's a problem. So it's kind of like the media and people's awareness of the disease is always a few steps behind the disease. So that's, I think, what's particularly worrisome to me. Now, the good news, and we've said this before, the good news about this is that the fatality rate isn't very high. It has grown slightly since the last time I said, I think it was 2%. They're estimating it could be a little bit higher, maybe as much as 3.5% now. But that's still relatively low. It's much lower than SARS, much lower than many other communicable diseases. So that's a good thing, but we still have to be vigilant. So it seems like those measures that are being taken are having a positive effect, and hopefully we won't see any major epidemics here in our city. One thing that we're definitely not seeing now is mass rioting. We're not seeing looting. We're not seeing general lawlessness here, which is obviously a very good thing. This is one of the main things that the WHO is concerned with in other countries, because China has such an impressive control over its people. In all these areas, they can kind of rally people and just clamp down on society. But other countries don't have that ability. So the WHO announcing this global emergency was particularly concerned with other countries that don't have those kinds of power over the people. Maybe poorer nations. If this starts to spread, then it could really turn into something much more deadly than what we're seeing here. But so far, so good, and we'll keep you up to date as much as we can in the coming days and weeks. Thanks for watching.